give a warm welcome to Andrea Guerrero, Executive Director of Alliance San Diego. Will you join me in welcoming Andrea? Andrea, thanks for joining us. Of course, we're all reading in the news about happenings down at the Plaza Chaparral and the tent city and all the rest. And so we were just giving folks a little bit of an update, but we really appreciate your joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and I'm going to turn this interview over to our mutual friend, Jim Gerber, who is doing double duty, serving on the board of directors at VIA International and on the board of directors at Alliance San Diego. And I'm going to go ahead and put Andrea and Jim in the spotlight so that Jim can take us away into a conversation about a new border vision. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you, John, and welcome, Andrea, and hello, everybody. Andrea, just to start, I wonder if you have anything else you would like to share about what Robert was just talking about. I noticed you have a message about the UNHCR is involved, and could you elucidate that a little bit, expand on it a bit?
Yeah, Robert did a great job providing ground information. There are a lot of organizations that are involved in trying to facilitate the processing of asylum seekers, both through MPP and hopefully outside of MPP soon. And so I don't have much to add. UNHCR is involved in processing the order. There are organizations that are at Chaparral who are giving information. There's some really great information that was developed on a flyer in many languages that is an attempt to fill the information gap that was created by both the Mexican and US government. And so there should be lots of information being distributed by our many friends on both sides of the border, but I understand that it is, yes, that's right. Al Otro Lado and AFSC are collaborating along with many other organizations to get information out to the community through handouts, through WhatsApp, and other means. Sounds like you're going to get a full update soon.
Yeah. Do we know, just out of curiosity, do we know the nationality of the people that are these mostly Mexican citizens, or are these from the Northern Triangle, or is there a mix of a lot of other nationalities as well? Do we know anything about that?
The MPPers are Northern Triangle and Mexican. There are, large populations of Haitians and Africans and people from other parts of the world that are there as well, but MPP was not a good program. So we don't want to say, oh, that was something that we ever wanted people to be subject to because it was pushing people back. But the irony in this moment is that people who were subject to MPP are at the front of the line, so to speak, and people who are not subject to MPP outside of the Northern Triangle and Mexico are really at their wits' end, and they are the ones that are crossing between the ports of entry right now.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I want to just back up a little bit and provide some context. So if you could give us share with us a little bit of information about your journey and how you came to be where you are today. As I understand it, your parents are immigrants from Mexico?
My father is an immigrant. I was born in Mexico City. I'm the product of the 1968 Olympics. My father is Mexican. He passed away. My mother, American. They were both working at the Olympics in Mexico City. And that's how they developed a relationship and fell in love. And
yeah.
I and my siblings were the product of that. I lived in Mexico for 5 years and then came to the United States. So I have the benefit of citizenship through my mother. I was registered as an American upon birth at the embassy. But the rest of my family has lived the immigrant experience. I've lived that with them. And so I have a feet in both worlds.
Yeah, thank you. And then could you also tell us a little bit about your educational background and how did you come to the work that you're doing now?
Sure. So I went to Stanford undergrad and had a really great experience there. I studied international relations with a focus on US-Mexico studies. I then went to University of Texas for a couple of years, got a master's in public policy, also focusing on US-Mexico policy issues, worked on a lot of transboundary issues, mostly natural resource issues, worked for the state of Texas for a couple of years as their border liaison, because Texas borders 4 Mexican states and they are constantly wrangling over aquifers and natural gas and other things. Then went on to law school at UC Berkeley, where I really got wrapped up in the issues of immigrants and refugees, did a lot of asylum work there, became an immigration attorney thereafter, and then decided to go into more policy advocacy work because of the many laws that are just broken. And as a lawyer, you can only interpret the law, and we need to do much more than that. We need to change the law. So that's why I do what I do at Alliance San Diego.
And you worked for a number of years for the ACLU while you were starting Alliance San Diego. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually started Alliance San Diego on paper when I was still a practicing attorney. So it was formed in my closet. And then I was hired into ACLU for a couple of years. And so at the time, Alliance San Diego was getting on its feet, had a few staff. And a couple of years in, we were at a make or break moment, and it needed a lot of attention. And so with the partnership of the board, I made the leap into executive director. And it was a leap of faith financially and otherwise, but it worked out.
Yeah. No, it's so Alliance does great work. And I think that it's an organization that should be more widely known in the community because of all the work it does across a number of different areas. I think, in my view, its work is very much aligned with what VIA does, but in a completely different way. In that VIA is much more on the ground in Tijuana, and is much more focused on community development in the sense of taking care of material and other needs of individuals, whereas Alliance is working in a more systematic and focused way on human rights issues and community empowerment, but on the US side of the border primarily. And so I think there's a nice kind of symmetry and complementariness of the two organizations. So with that little bit of background, and just so people know that Alliance is an organization about community empowerment and about building a more inclusive democracy, which protects people's rights. Alliance has been involved in border issues, in particular in the development of what is called a new border vision. Now, I know that came out of the Southern Border Communities Coalition, but I don't want to say it's a branch of Alliance, but it's affiliated closely.
It's a program of Alliance.
Yeah, okay. And so this is the new border vision is an initiative that Alliance has put forward. And could you talk a little bit about what the goals of this document are, and why Alliance is calling for a new way of seeing the border? I mean, what are the things that you hope that will address with a different way of looking at the border?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking, Jim. And if it's okay, I'd love to share my screen. I have a few slides that may help.
Please, do you have the ability to do that?
I don't, so somebody might need to enable me.
Yeah, Aida, can you?
I got it now. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Yeah.
All right.
So we will put also in make sure everybody gets a URL so they can link.
Great.
Yeah.
So the New Border Vision was created out of a sense of frustration in the border region. As many of you know, because you are part of the border communities, we have lived under the thumb of hyper-militarization and harsh enforcement for many decades now. Those policies have never comported with our values, nor with international human rights. And so we decided in the depth of our despair to take a step back and think about what we wanted. We wanted to create a new horizon, and we wanted to create the language of possibility to get to that horizon. So we brought together international experts that included international rapporteurs for the United Nations, human rights experts, border stakeholders from both the northern border and the southern border. And we came together in a long weekend, and we thought about what we wanted in a new border vision, and we applied global best practices in human rights and border governance in order to achieve that. And so just briefly, to make sure we all have the same, to do a level set for everyone, you know, the problem as we see it, the problem that we're trying to address is that the United States criminalizes migration, and that border authorities have excessive power and they abuse it, and that the government does not hold its agents accountable. And that's created tremendous harm. Migrants cannot exercise their human rights. Border residents, visitors, and migrants are abused. And we are not safe when the government acts with impunity. And so we believe that a new border vision should be built on 3 pillars. And I'm going to get to those, but we believe fundamentally that we should lead with our values to address our needs and adhere to good governance to create humane and well-functioning borders. And so, as I mentioned, we're building this new border vision on international human rights principles. And specifically, we are looking to this document on recommended principles and guidelines on human rights at international borders, which is a United Nations document, which is excellent, and I recommend it to everyone. It's a synthesis of all of the international human rights norms that we should aspire to, but we don't quite. So we married that with our own Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Our declaration says that all people, it said men, but we have since amended men to all people through the 14th Amendment, but that all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that right is an inalienable right, meaning it cannot be taken away, meaning that it was endowed by our Creator, known by many names. And that is the definition of a human right. And so it is our first human right that we recognize here in the United States. So marrying our foundational values with international best practices on human rights, we created a new border vision. And we identified 5 key values. The first is that which I just shared, upholding the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, partnering with border communities in decision-making, recognizing the dignity and humanity of migrants, and honoring the principles of non-discrimination and striving for social cohesion and inclusion. Every single one of these values can be found in both our foundational documents, our governing documents, and also in international best practices. And so we identified, as I said, 3 pillars for a new border vision, and that is expanding public safety, protecting human rights, and welcoming people to the border with dignity. So what does expanding public safety mean for us? It means focusing border authorities and resources on true threats, not migration, ending unreasonable searches, seizures, surveillance, and detention, and employing best practices for effective, professional, and accountable policing. You know, we're in a national reckoning right now on policing, and we view border authorities as police, but they have more power, less oversight, and create more harm than any law enforcement agency in the country, including federal law enforcement agencies. They are also the largest law enforcement agency in the country, larger than the all other federal law enforcement agencies, which include FBI, DEA, Secret Service, ATF, and US Marshals. And so for us, expanding public safety is about expanding our safety to be safe from border authorities. And our document, which goes into more detail, spells these things out. So the second pillar is protecting human rights. For us, that means prioritizing human rights, making them sacrosanct and allowing people to seek protection or safe return. Providing immediate aid, rescue, and recovery to people in distress instead of criminalizing them, or instead of penalizing people who provide those things to them. And then protecting children and other vulnerable people and keeping families together. You know, and we detail in the new border vision, you know, what are the international standards? For example, detention should never be an option for children. Never, ever, ever. And we're still looking at detention as an area of concern. And then lastly, and I think this is the most far-reaching part of our new border vision, our third pillar is about welcoming people, to expand the channels at ports of entry to eliminate long wait lines, expedite entry interviews, to identify and clear people or refer them for help, and really take a whole of government and a whole of society approach to provide access to interpretation, information, and assistance. So in our new border vision, the only thing that CBP officers are doing at the ports of entry is identifying and referring. That's it. They are inspectors. That's it. They are not on a fishing expedition to find out if you've ever done something wrong. They are not there to deal with asylum claims or humanitarian concerns or unaccompanied minors. They are simply identifying people and referring them in a whole of society, whole of government approach to either the appropriate governmental authority or non-governmental authority to care for people, And that is what is not going on sufficiently right now. And then lastly, you know, we have long been in a regime of enforcement first, enforcement only here in the borderlands. And we have ignored border governance. And, you know, when I started my career, I started, you know, with the state of Texas, talking about border governance issues, working with the International Boundary and Water Commission, engaging on issues of shared management of resources. And we were, you know, thinking a lot about what it meant to be managing, caring for, governing in the border region. And, you know, that's where we need to head. We need to head to a paradigm of good border governance. Now, good governance is, you know, it's a set of principles that are widely understood in academia and in business, in the nonprofit world and philanthropy. And they have 5 principal rules to them. And that is that they are driven by decision-making. Their decision-making is driven by accurate data. They are engaged in consulting with affected stakeholders. They are transparent to the public. They are subject to oversight, and they are also subject to accountability. And so what we can agree to disagree on many things, but we should all agree to the rules of good border governance. Right now, we have not historically in the last couple of decades been doing any of this. We've not been making informed decision-making. We've not been consulting with stakeholders in the border region. There's been no transparency, very little oversight, and of course, very little accountability. So we can do better. Our new border vision lays out a new horizon where we should head. That's not piecemeal in approach. It's more holistic in approach, creates the language of possibility, and is where we are headed in the work that we do in partnership with our friends in the Southern Border Communities Coalition, which is a coalition that stretches from San Diego to Brownsville to advance a brighter future. I will stop there. That was a lot of information, but that's an overview.
That was great. Thank you, Andrea. I just want to tell everybody there's some construction in the background, and so if it gets too noisy, let me know, and I'll try to do something about it. So I think what I found really stimulating and interesting about this is the idea that a lot of what the new border vision consists of is a recognition that problems at the border are a result of bad governance, that we have abandoned some of our primary governance principles when we address the border. And it relates to this securitization of everything in our lives and the way in which we've given up, I think, a lot of freedoms, a lot of human rights, and made ourselves less safe because of how we've become so focused on and really on security and intimidated by security forces and the idea, the logic of security seems to be intimidating. So I'm wondering, where do we go with this? What happens with a new border vision? How do we promote this new way of thinking about the border, and ultimately, how do we rein in CBP, and how do we have to affect federal policy in some way, because they are a creation of the federal government, and the way in which the federal government exercises oversight over them has to be developed, has to be improved. So I'm just wondering, where do we go from here, given the principles that you've laid out, and what's next?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that question, Jim. And so we use the new border vision as our North Star. We look at policy proposals through the lens of a new border vision, and we act on that, right? We also have been passing local resolutions, and this work got interrupted a bit, but because of COVID. But before COVID, we were passing local resolutions in what we call border cities, and we intentionally started in Northern California because we wanted people to understand that that if they're anywhere in the 100-mile perimeter of the United States, that they're in the border zone, they're subject to increased enforcement, lack of oversight, potential harm, etc.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second here? I just think that point is really important, that the CBP, the Customs and Border Protection Agency, this new federal police agency, defines the border as 100 miles from the territorial boundary of the US. So it doesn't have to be on the US-Mexico border or the US-Canadian border. San Francisco is a border city by the definition of CBP. And this is a way in which I think, they're grabbing rights away from us and redefining things that needs to be emphasized. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that point.
That's right. So, 99% of California is in the border zone. The San Diego Border Patrol sector ends at the Oregon border, just to give you a sense of their reach. So the first resolutions that we passed were in San Francisco and in Berkeley, and then we started to work our way south. We got a few local resolutions here before COVID hit hard, and we suspended the local resolution work. But what we did pick up instead was drafting a new border vision resolution in Congress as a way to educate community or members of Congress to socialize the concepts in new border vision. We also ran an opinion poll in the entirety of the Southwest, in every single Southwest state, test the concepts because we knew that we would need to build power to build momentum. And so what we found was that voters, because we were in election season previously, overwhelmingly support the concepts of a new border revision. And so we have been engaging with members of Congress. Initially, before the election, it was about a resolution, but now with things opening up with a new administration and with both chambers of Congress under Democratic control, we're actually looking at drafting a border accountability bill that will move from the language of possibility to the language of practical application. And sounds like a big haul to pass legislation at any time, but we just did. We passed legislation, related legislation in January of 2020. Actually, we were still under the Trump era, and we got near unanimous support in both chambers of Congress and the signature of the president on a bill that is a humanitarian bill that would authorize funding for a new technology, 911 relay cell phone rescue beacons in remote parts of the desert, and would also authorize many millions of dollars for forensic work to identify and repatriate remains of the many thousands of people who have died, who are still unidentified. So, we think that even in the most difficult of political circumstances, that what we are selling is, good governance, it's humanitarian values, and those things resonate across the aisle. And it is possible. It's going to be, we think, easier with a change in the political landscape, electoral landscape. But everything is hard at all times. But we are buoyed by the fact that we were able to move legislation with the help of with two unlikely champions, which were Texas Senator John Cornyn, a Republican, and California Senator Kamala Harris, a Democrat.
Yeah, I remember when the bill passed. It was a bit surprising to see that it was signed, and it was So what role does the Southern Border Communities Coalition play in promoting the new border vision? And could you talk just briefly about the history of the SBCC? Where did that come from? Why is that an important part of Alliance's engagement with border issues?
Yeah, so the mission of Alliance San Diego has been to build collective power to help organizations and individuals engage more effectively in the civic process. We believe that when we help people understand how to use the tools of democracy, and we use them together at the same time, that we can affect real change, systemic change. And so we build a lot of coalitions, and one of those coalitions is national in scope, and that is the Southern Border Communities Coalition, which we house, we staff, we resource. We have 2 staff members in DC that are Alliance San Diego staff members that serve the coalition. We have a full-time director, and then we have our communications shop, which goes a long way. The SBCC is governed by a steering committee of organizations that represent the Southwest states, and we work together to advance common strategies and goals.
Yeah, thank you. So changing the subject a little bit, but who was Anastasio Hernandez, and why is Alliance involved in his family's case?
Now, Anastasio Hernandez Rojas was a longtime San Diegan who was killed by border agents in May of 2010. And myself and our colleagues at the American Friends Service Committee were first on the ground to be working with the families then. I don't think we knew how far this case would go then, but it was a case of brutality. And Anastasio was killed in front of hundreds of witnesses by border agents at the port, at San Ysidro port of entry. He had been apprehended in San Diego by police, didn't have papers, was turned over to Border Patrol, who deported him. And, you know, he attempted to come back, as many do, because he had 5 children and a wife here. And so he attempted to come back. He was apprehended. And because he had the audacity to assert his rights, he was beaten and ultimately killed. And so what was most appalling about that case was not only that he was brutally killed, but that it occurred in front of so many passersby, and that there was a concerted attempt to cover it up. And so, you know, his family pursued justice in civil court, and they also pursued justice in the criminal court system, but Department of Justice refused to bring charges. And so because they were not able to get the kind of justice that was warranted here, we have continued their cause, and we've taken the case into an international tribunal. So we've accompanied the family in the entirety of their journey. Their case, the case of Anastasio, was the beginning of a wave of killings in the border region. It is also the tip of the spear in breaking the credibility shield of CBP, because we caught them lying, thanks to eyewitness video who showed a set of facts that were different from what the agents had shared. And so where we are now with that case is we have gone to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is an international tribunal of the Organization of American States. The United States subjects itself to this tribunal. And the Inter-American Commission has admitted this case and is currently considering this case. It is the first case ever that the Commission has taken up of a case against the United States for what we call an extrajudicial killing, a killing perpetrated by the state, meaning by the government. Behind this case are the cases of Black and brown men and women who have been killed by police or by border agents throughout the country. Our case is not against individual agents. Our case is against the United States government itself for perpetuating a system of impunity, and for allowing this kind of impunity, which we deem to be systemic, to occur. And the things that we are seeking are, you know, not only a recognition of wrongdoing and reopening of the investigation, the criminal investigation, but also reparations to the community, because the harms committed here were not only against Anastasio and his family, but against, you know, the community of the United States. And to remedy that, we need policy change. And so we're leveraging this case to get some of the policy changes that are called for in the new border vision. I'll just give you one concrete example. We would love to see Congress pass a law that creates a dedicated prosecutorial unit at the Department of Justice that is solely focused on investigating and prosecuting criminal offenses by border agents. And we don't have that, right? And we have it for other things, but we don't have it for border agents. Given the size of CBP, given the scale of corruption, they are, you know, they are engaging in criminal offenses at 7 to 10 times the rate of all other federal agencies combined. We think that the dangers they present to border communities and to, quite frankly, national security warrant a special prosecutorial unit. If we could get one thing, apart from an apology, which is what the family is seeking, that one change would go a long way to to alleviating the issue of impunity.
Yeah. I mean, that would have to be passed through both houses of Congress, I assume. It's a piece
Yep,
of
that's right.
legislation.
That's right. But we not only have the ability to move things legislatively, but because of this case, that is an ask in the case.
Yeah.
This case is running on a parallel track that we could leverage and enter into negotiations with the government on.
Yeah, yeah. So if people aren't familiar with this case, I encourage you to look it up because it's a blatant example of the kinds of abuses and denial of human rights, human liberty, and life, even carried out by our border patrol. Is this, Andrea? Do you think this is the sort of thing where if the International Court of Human Rights, at the OAS, if it finds in favor of Anastasio Hernandez's family and against the U.S., that the U.S. might just ignore? I mean, we do that oftentimes with international commitments that we've made. If it's inconvenient, we will oftentimes just sort of try to ignore it as best we can. Is this, I mean, could this be brushed aside easily, or would there be consequences?
So the United States does not subject itself to all things in the international realm, but it does subject itself to the Inter-American Commission. So this is not an instance of something that we haven't ratified or something like that. No, we're not only all in as a country, as a nation state, but the United States uses the commission process, uses the tribunal to hold other member states accountable all the time. And so its ability to do that would be severely undermined if it then turned around and said, well, we're not going to allow ourselves to be subject to, we're not going to follow the recommendations of, they would be in a pickle, quite frankly. And, right now, they're reseating the commission, and the United States wants to place a commissioner. And, they often, more often than not, there is a U.S. citizen sitting on that commission, and the United States is represented on that commission.
Yeah.
Well, they can't very well sit on that commission and seek to curry the favor and the support of other member states if they decide that especially in this high-profile first ever case against them for an extrajudicial killing, they decide to ignore the recommendations and rulings of the Inter-American Commission.
Yeah.
It's not that they haven't been brought before the commission before. It's just that they haven't been brought before the commission on a extrajudicial killing. That's what's new. But the commission's bread and butter is extrajudicial killing. This is what they, 9 out of 10 of their rulings are on. And so the law here is really well settled at the commission. And the case we presented is extremely detailed. And in fact, a few weeks ago, we might have been months, I can't remember. It's all a blur. Maybe a month ago, we submitted 3 testimonials from 3 high-level officials in the U.S. government, 45 pages of sworn testimony from former officials at the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection, all high-ranking officials who said that the agency is corrupt, that they engaged in a cover-up, and that is a systemic problem that can only be stopped or addressed with systemic change. It was very damning on top of a very detailed report. So we have high hopes for that case case will set precedent and create real change.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. I think that it could be some leverage to force about the sorts of changes that are in some of the changes that are in the new border vision. John, how are we doing on time?
We're doing great. And there are just a couple of great questions in the chat room I want to make sure squeeze in. You want me to go ahead and lift those up, Jim?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, Andrea, one question asking you to just elaborate on the legal basis for the 100-mile perimeter. I know I've heard you and others, ACLU and others refer to it as the Constitution-free zone. But you say a little bit more about the legal parameters within which Customs, Border Protection, and other federal officials are able to operate.
Yes, yes. So Congress in the 1950s, at the height of the Red Scare, passed a law. It's the most evil of all laws, in my opinion, and it's the statute is 8 USC 1357, and in there it gives border authorities, which were then Border Patrol and excuse me, INS, gave border authorities extraordinary power, extra power to act without a warrant to engage in searches. And you know, our Fourth Amendment in the Constitution says we shall be free of warrantless searches. Period. And so for Congress to have passed a law that gives CBP the power to engage in warrantless searches is deeply problematic. And they said that they would have reasonable distance in order to do that. The federal regulations have defined what reasonable distance is, and it is there that we see 100 miles. And so in this dreamy Border Accountability Act that we would love to introduce, it would strike 1357 powers to search without warrant. Period. Shouldn't exist. No other law enforcement agency has that power for a reason. We believe that CBP should not benefit from any excuses or exceptions or exclusions from the civil liberty and civil rights protections that keep us all safe.
And could you expand on how that precedent and that legal infrastructure interacted with the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security?
Yes. Yeah. So, you know, yeah. So 100 miles, the 100-mile jurisdiction may not have mattered pre 9/11 because there weren't that many agents. I mean, we closest to the border were always concerned about bad agents, but for the full 100-mile zone, even though the Border Patrol sector reached to Oregon, very few agents were found outside of San Diego, for example. But come 9/11, you know, the country responds with a hyper-militarization of the country, and specifically in the borderlands, we create Department of Homeland Security as a response to 9/11. And in 2003 and 2004, we create the Customs and Border Protection, which is sits under Department of Homeland Security and is where Border Patrol now lives, and you know, other alphabet soup agencies. And then the kicker after that was that Congress could not say no to requests for funding for more border agents and more border enforcement. And so we went on the spending frenzy led by Republicans, but Democrats were complicit, and everybody was trying to out security everybody else. And in the course of 2 decades, we have more than quadrupled the size of CBP. So we have, in the last 2 decades, or, you know, at this point, I'll say last many decades, we have created what we call a green monster. That's what actually other law enforcement calls Border Patrol or CBP, an agency that has dangerous jurisdiction, has dangerous power granted by Congress, and has a dangerous level of resources. That is a triple threat that we should all be very concerned about, which is why we think that we can sell a Border Accountability Act to rein in what everybody knows and sees as a rogue agency.
Thank you, Andrea. And then another one question, institutional perhaps, about Alliance San Diego, about funding and your nonprofit architecture where you receive support, individual donations and beyond. And then another more pertaining back to the new border vision and about local members of Congress. And I know you don't want to call anybody out, but are there particular champions here locally or elsewhere in Congress who are pushing this forward?
Yeah, so Alliance San Diego is funded with donations and with grants. And we have, about 80% of our funding comes from foundations and about 20% comes from individual donations. So we welcome you to give if you would like to give at alliancesd.org. We always use the donations. We punch way above our weight. We do a lot with a little. We give you a good bang for your buck. In terms of the local congressional delegation, well, we have 5 members, and you can probably guess which one is on our naughty list. And that is Daryl Issa. But the other members of Congress have been great for us. And that's Sarah Jacobs, Juan Vargas, Scott Peters, and Mike Levin. And all 4 of them, we keep them close. And we try to make sure that they know how to talk about the border and what to do. Some of those members are more important to us because of the committees or the caucuses that they sit on. For example, Scott Peters sits on the budget committee, and that's very important to us right now because we're going through the budget process and we're trying to make sure that we are defunding hate.
Thanks for that. Thanks. Jim, I don't know if you have any, my final question was going to be about border-wide coalitions again, but maybe you have we're ready to let Andrea go at 1 o'clock as we promised, but also any final questions or wrap up from you?
Yeah, I would love to hear you comment, Andrea, about the Biden administration's legislation that they've introduced, and then there's also the Dream and Promise Act that's in Congress as well. I don't know if there's time for that. I know those are kind of big.
Well, I can be succinct.
Yeah.
So we were engaging with the Biden administration as soon as they were elected. In fact, before they were elected, we were engaging with the Biden team, and so we were very pleased to see the Biden administration pick up a lot of the language in a new border vision. So they're talking about border governance. They're talking about management as opposed to just enforcement, right? So they've really pivoted. They've started to talk about whole of government and whole of society approaches, which is really helpful and welcoming. The Biden administration has introduced something called the U.S. Citizenship Act, which is a comprehensive bill. It includes increased border accountability. It goes a long way in implementing our vision in the new border vision. And we are grateful for that. And it was absolutely informed by our new border vision. That act may be broken up. And so you're starting to see things like the Dream and Promise Act, which are being pulled out, and they're trying to run pieces through committees to see if they can get enough pieces through the committees to either reassemble at the other end or to just simply pass out. So the 3 big bills that are going to move are Dream and Promise Act, which are for Dreamers and TPS recipients. There's an Agricultural Act, and then there's an Essential Worker Act. And the idea is to move those 3 pieces. And if we can get enough support for those 3 pieces, maybe they come back together to be passed as a collective bill, or maybe they're passed individually. Either at this point is fine. What's missing from all 3 of those pieces of legislation are border accountability, which is why we want to pull out the border accountability parts, strengthen them a bit, run them through as well. That's the strategy.
Yeah. The Ag Act, I assume, is about temporary guest workers, or about?
No, it's a pathway to citizenship.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
for all 3. So there are 11 million undocumented estimated. If we can, get these 3 acts passed, that would be a substantial amount of the 11 million.
Yeah.
Or the other changes that could be made that would get us close to 11 million. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Andrea, thanks so much for joining us. Let me invite everybody to just join me with a round of applause for Andrea. Appreciate your time. Thank you for squeezing us in and for the wealth of information, your background, unparalleled work here and locally. Want to congratulate you and thank you for the work you've done across so many years. And for the work of Alliance, the collaborative spirit of Alliance, and the networks that coalitions you've convened, Southern Border Community Coalition and others. So we just really appreciate you, appreciate your work, and I really appreciate your taking the time to be with us today for Via Voices. Jim Gerber, thanks so much for inviting Andrea and hosting this conversation.
Yeah, let me just say thank you to Andrea also. I really appreciate you taking the time, as John said.
Yeah, well, I appreciate all of you at Via International. I appreciate your partnership and all the work that you're doing, especially right now.